All right. Okay, so let's start. Welcome everyone to ISTQB training, CTFL, session number 16. In last session, we started the new module, fifth module, which is test management. And in that, we covered test organization. And we started test planning and estimation. And so far in that, we have covered what is the purpose and content of a test plan. And we also cover different types of test strategies. So moving on, now we will learn about the entry and exit criteria. So this is the continuation of test planning and estimation. Okay, so first of all, let's try to understand what is an entry criteria. So entry criteria, as the definition states, that it defines the preconditions for undertaking a given test activity. The same criteria, which like in sequential projects, the term is used as entry criteria. But if you are doing any project in Agile, then the same concept is termed as definition of ready. So any preconditions which should be there before you start any kind of test activity. So these are some typical entry criteria which might include, they can be much more than this as well. It can be customized as per the requirements of different test activities, but more common are these. First of all, availability of testable requirements, user stories or models. Of course, if you have to perform any test activity, if you have to design test cases or you have to execute test cases, first of all, of course, there should be any requirements which are testable. What are testable requirements? We covered it earlier. Don't remember exactly in which session, but one of the earlier sessions we did cover this part in detail, that when there are certain requirements, first of all, we check for the testability of those requirements. So you can refer back to that section if that's not clear. Okay, the second one is availability of test items that have met the exit criteria for any prior test levels. So if we are doing multiple test levels and there are entry criteria for different test levels, then we also have to consider the exit criteria, which of course we will do shortly, that what was the exit criteria of the previous test level. Then the next one is availability of test environment. So what kind of test environment we need for our test activities. If there is a specific requirement and we don't have that test environment available, then we need to make sure that it's there. The next one is availability of necessary test tools. In order to perform testing, whatever kind of testing you are doing, whatever tools you need for those test activities, those tools need to be accessible. You need to have those test tools so that you can start your testing. And the last one is availability of test data and other necessary resources. So when you are designing test cases, of course, you will also you will prepare test data as well. But if you don't have the availability of test data, like if you don't know that what kind of test data will you require to prepare or condition, or what kind of resources you need, then, and if those resources are not there, then the entry criteria, so this will be one of the precondition as an entry criteria, because you can't begin your testing without it. The next one is exit criteria. So this defines what conditions must be achieved in order to declare a test level or a set of tests completed. And similarly, in Agile, this term is known as definition of done. So let's see what are the few things which are included in exit criteria. So planned tests have been executed. So whatever tests you have planned, you have designed, so the aim should be that you should be able to execute those tests. The next one is a defined level of coverage has been achieved. Okay, so now all these entry and exit criteria, they are either part of a test plan if you are doing a proper formal test plan, even if it's like a master test plan or a level test plan. So these entry and exit criteria will be part of those plans. Or if you are doing a project in Agile where we don't have any formal documents, then this should be documented in any form. If you are using a test management tool, maybe it should be part of that. It can be in any form, but it should be documented somewhere. Right, okay, so the third one is the number of unresolved defects is within an agreed limit. So you can agree on as an exit criteria that there are all the critical and high defects are resolved, or maybe medium are also resolved depending on the complexity of the project, and maybe the low defects, even if those are not resolved and they are agreed within the team to do in the next phase, then that should be fine as well. But this, what should be the criteria? It should be defined in the exit criteria that what needs to be done. The next one is the number of estimated remaining defects is sufficiently low. Yeah, so it can be the number of defects, it can be the criticality of the defects. So whatever the measure would be, it has to be defined as part of exit criteria. And the last one is the evaluated levels of reliability, performance efficiency, usability, security, and other relevant quality characteristics are sufficient. So over here, these characteristics which are defined, these mostly come under non-functional testing. So these are all things which, if applicable to a certain project, then that need to be defined in the exit criteria as well. And of course, most of them, they would be applicable because these are the key characteristics of any project. Okay, so over here now we are done with what is an entry criteria and an exit criteria. So both of them, they should be defined for either each test level or and test type as well, because that will be different based on the testing objectives. Okay, so one more thing, that it is quite common to end or sign off testing even without the exit criteria being satisfied. It is a common thing which does happen. Of course, not ideal, but it does happen because often things doesn't go as per the plan. So it can be due to maybe the budget which was allocated for that project is already used for other things, or it can be that whatever the time scheduled, the time planned for that project, that's over, and there is a pressure to launch the product. So there can be different factors which can lead to a situation where exit criteria is not satisfied, but we have to sign off or we have to go live. So in this case, what happens then? It is this is acceptable if the stakeholders and business owners, they agree with the test managers that they are happy to accept the risk. So first of all, of course, they will review the risk, and then they will, if they are accepting the risk and they are happy, then that project can, or release can go live without exit criteria being satisfied as well. Okay, so the next section is test execution schedule. Right. So once we have our test cases and our test procedures all designed, and then we can group them into different test suites. And these test suites are then arranged in a schedule of the test execution. So this is basically what defines the order in which these tests will be executed. And and there are few factors which affects the test execution schedule, and the factors are listed over here. The first one is prioritization. So ideally, whenever we have a number of tests, we always group them in a way that we execute the high priority tests first. So this is always like the first thing we go for, that the high priority test will be executed first. But of course, there are few exceptions, which we will go through now. So the second one is dependency. So this is the first exception. So first of all, first rule, whenever there are number of tests, if there are 10 tests, we will also always run the one which with higher priority. And then of course, if we have like high, medium, low, then the high one will be first, medium, and then low. But the exception is dependency. For example, if you see this part, so if we have two test cases and the priority of the first test case is high and the priority of the second test case is low, as per the rule of high prioritization, we should be running the test case one first. But if this test case is dependent on the execution of this one, this test case, then regardless of the priorities, we have to run the test case 2. So we will run this one first and then the test case 1. So there are few exceptions where, like dependencies, if there are any dependencies, then we will run those ones first, and we will then not apply the rule of prioritization in those cases. Then we have confirmation test and regression test. So we know what are confirmation and regression tests. In case if someone is not familiar, we did cover it earlier under, I think, maintenance testing. So you can go back and see those slides, so you'll get to know. So in confirmation test and regression test, again, the rule of prioritization does apply with the exception of dependencies. So it will be the same for confirmation and regression test as well. Then the last one is most efficient sequence for executing the test. So as I have just tried to show over here, that sometimes if we are testing a specific series of tests, there is a proper sequence in which we can't, so there has to be like the first test case need to be executed first, and then the second, then the third, then the fourth, because it's in a proper sequence. It's a series of tests, and we just can't shuffle the test in that scenario. So in that scenario as well, we uh, don't see the priorities. We just see that in which sequence the test cases need to be executed regardless of their priorities. So with that, we are done with the test execution schedule. The next one is the factors influencing the test effort. Okay, so first of all, let's see that what is this test effort. So test effort estimation, it provides the amount of effort which is required to perform any test activity. So test estimation is basically, it's a difficult thing to do, because one common mistake which usually is done whenever we provide the test effort estimation is that we only take account of that effort which is required for the test execution, while but this is not correct, because test estimates must also include the estimates of the time which we take to carry out all the testing related activities. For example, planning, when we do the test planning, and when we design and write the test cases, when we generate test reports. So of course, all these activities are part of testing, and it does consume time. So whenever we are estimating the test effort, it's really important that we also consider all these things as well. Okay, so now these are the test activities, but of course there are some other things as well. Like for example, if you have to set up a test environment, then the test effort should be estimated for that as well. If you have to prepare test data, and if you and on top of that, you should also allow some buffer in your test effort estimation for multiple cycles of testing. Because if you have estimated that there are 10 test cases and it will take you 1 day, it's not a guarantee that all those test cases will pass in the first go, because no one can predict that. So that's why it's always wise to have a buffer in your test effort estimation, where you are including the time of retesting of fixes as well, which are discovered during testing. So all these things need to be part of the test effort estimation, and this always it always like I can say groomed as you get more experience, because you learn from all the mistakes which you did last time, and then as you are more experienced, then down the line it becomes more easier for you to estimate the test effort. Okay, so now there are few factors which influence the test effort, and we'll go through those. And these are categorized into different categories. So the first one is product characteristics. So this include the risk associated with the product, the quality of the test basis. The test basis can be the requirement, it can be the code, etc. The size of the product, the complexity of the product domain, the requirements for quality characteristics, for example, security, reliability, and the next one is the required level of detail for test documentation and requirements for legal and regulatory compliance. So over here, these are the product characteristics that when we are estimating the test effort, then if we are doing it for a specific product, then these are the factors which can influence the way we are estimating our effort. Then the next one is development process characteristics. And this includes the stability and maturity of the organization. Okay, so this is very important because every organization is at different level in terms of the stability and the maturity of their processes. Because if it's a new company, then of course they are still learning as they are doing different things, and there might be no processes in place. And if there are no processes in place, which means that there might be different gap in the way things they are doing and what's expected as an industry standard, which means that they are not very mature and stable in terms of the processes. While on the other hand, if there is an organization which is quite process oriented and they have been doing this since long, and they have processes in place which are practiced, which are implemented for each and every project, then of course the maturity and stability of any product of that organization would be totally different. So that's why this is a key factor uh, which affects the way we are estimating the test effort. So the first one, as we said, the stability and maturity of the organization. Then is the development model in use, that what kind of model we are using. Either we are using agile model, we are doing DevOps, we are doing sequential. So it all matters as well. Then the third one is the test approach, that when we are defining our test approach, what kind of test approach we have defined. And we did this in the last session, that there are factors itself which are included to decide that what kind of test approach we should go for. Then which tools are we using? Because sometimes if we have certain tools, it makes our job easier, and we can get maybe some automated results as well. So it depends on, of course, what kind of tools we have access to. Then the test process. What is the test process? Because every organization will have a separate test process as well. And the last one is time pressure, that do we have the flexibility in the time we get to deliver the product, or do we have any kind of time pressure? Because even if like everything is in place and at the end we have some pressure in terms of time in which we have to deliver that project or product, then definitely that would affect the way we estimate our test effort. The next one is people characteristics. So the skills and experience of the people involved, especially with similar projects and products, for example, domain knowledge. Okay, so we did this before as well, that in experience-based testing, that if a person who has a specific skill or knowledge which is required for that project, of course, is familiar with that domain, and it will be easier for that person to come up with the more near to accurate, not accurate, but like more reasonable, more realistic test efforts. And the second one is team cohesion and leadership. Okay, so this is also very important, that how well the team works with each other, and the person who is leading that team, is there a good leadership in place? Because despite of all the resources, skills, tools, if the team is not working well together and there is not a good leadership in place, then that will affect uh, whatever the estimation you have given, and the time frame as well in which we have to deliver a certain project. The next one is time estimation techniques. Okay, so the estimates are often dependent upon the type of testing to be performed and also the quality of the resources available on the project. For example, the complex tests which are created by a member of a team who is, let's say, not familiar with the testing tool, they are likely to take much longer than the tests which are created by an experienced tester who is well familiar with that tool. So that's why when we are estimating, it is dependent on different factors as we just covered, and they are broadly categorized into two different techniques. The first one is metrics-based technique. In that, it's like the estimating the test effort based on metrics of former similar projects or based on typical values. And the next one is expert-based technique. So estimating the test effort based on the experience of the owners of the testing task or by experts. So in the first one, we are having the metrics which we got from the earlier projects, the similar projects, and the second one is based on the experts' uh, skills, etc. as well. So over here we can see that there are two different SDLC models, and we are trying to show that how the test estimation techniques might be a little bit different for both of them. So the first one is Agile, and in Agile we have burn down charts, which is an example of metric-based approach. So in case if anyone is not familiar with what is the term burn down chart, so it is basically a graphic representation which shows the completed work per day against the planned rate of completion for the current sprint or for the current release, etc. as well. So when we start a sprint, then we allocate some time, the velocity to that sprint, and then every day we track, we see that are we on track, and this is basically the aim, to see if the project is on track and will be able to deliver the contents at the end of the sprint. And it also helps to determine the amount of work the team can do in the next iteration as well. So if the velocity we have defined, let's say 80 for a certain sprint, and then during the sprint when we track through the burn down chart and we see that, oh, it's not working, maybe we were really optimistic, then it will help us to maybe reduce the velocity for the next sprint, etc. So reduce the number of hours or the resources, increase the resources. So it helps the way we work. The next one is planning poker. So burn down chart is an example of metric based approach because we have metrics in place. We have a graphical representation based on metrics which we are getting each day. So that's why it's known as metric based approach. And an example of expert based approach is planning poker. Okay, so again, if you are not doing an agile project, then you might not be familiar with this term planning poker. So just to explain to those. So planning poker, it's an estimating and planning exercise that is done during sprint planning meeting. And in that planning poker cards are used for estimating effort and then come up with a relative size of a user story. So each one have cards and they come up with an estimate, and then let's say if there are 5 people and 3 of them have agreed on one size of that user story, then as a majority, then that's taken written down as an estimate for that user story. So this is an expert based approach because everyone who is providing estimates, they are providing estimates based on their knowledge or maybe their experience based on the last sprint or when they did something similar, or maybe any last project as well. Okay, so the second one is sequential. So in sequential as well, we have defect removal model, which is an example of metric-based approach. So defect removal is like where number of defects and the timings they are captured and reported, which then acts basically as a base for estimating future similar projects. So over here also, because we are talking about the number of defects, so it's a metric based approach. So similarly, the expert based approach in a sequential project is wideband Delphi. So this is only one example. Of course, there are other as well, but this is quite similar to the planning poker because over here also there are a group of experts who provides estimates based on their experience and expertise. So I hope that this is also clear. And as usual, of course, if you have any kind of question then related to this session, then please just post your question in Q&A section. All right, so the next section is test monitoring and control. So we are done with the test planning and estimation, and the next section is test monitoring and control. And in this section, we have 2 learning objectives. The number 1 is recall metrics used for testing. Summarize the purposes, contents, and audiences for test reports. Okay, so the first one is test monitoring. Okay, so as the definition says, the purpose is to gather information and provide feedback and visibility about test activities. Okay, so this activity focuses on providing information about the progress of testing. So once we have started any testing activity, of course, we have to monitor that test activity as well. So this is more related to the progress of testing. So it involves a gathering of metrics, and with gathering of those metrics, we can measure that whether any testing objectives were met or not, for example, exit criteria. So these metrics can be either collected manually or automatically. So manually, of course, if we have, we can collect the number of defects, etc. And automatically, there are some code coverage tools which provides us that how much in the, let's say, statement testing, etc. So if we are using any kind of code coverage tool, then that would be an example of like automatically gathering of the metrics. Then the next one is test control. So test monitoring and test control, they go hand in hand. So monitoring is about like gathering all those metrics, and test control is describing describes any guiding or corrective actions taken as a result of information and metrics gathered and possibly reported. Okay, so it refers to corrective action that are considered necessary to keep a project on track or meet the exit criteria. Because let's say that we planned something in the beginning. After that, once we have started any test activity, and as we are monitoring the progress of that test activity, we have come across with something which was not as per plan. There was some deviation. Then of course we need to take some corrective action in order to keep that on track as much as possible. And that's what test control does. Okay, so the examples of test control actions, it include reprioritizing tests when an identified risk occurs, for example, software delivered late. So let's say that if we are, uh, if there were 5 days allocated for testing, and we didn't and we got the release quite late for testing, and then we are only left with 3 days instead of 5 days. Of course the number of tests would be the same, because that's what we required 5 days for, based on of course the estimation was done based on different factors, but now we have got only 3 days. So what we can do is we can reprioritize tests, maybe based on the risks. So the risk-based testing, that we know that in 3 days we are not able to execute all tests, so we can then just execute the higher risk tests. The second one is changing the test schedule due to availability or unavailability of a test environment or other resources. Okay, so if we are ready to perform testing, but let's say that we have not got the test environment, or maybe the test environment was all set up, but there can be any infrastructure issue because of any mishap, the test environment is not available, then of course the testing schedule can be changed as well. Then the third one is re-evaluating whether a test item meets an entry or exit criterion due to rework, right? So in the beginning, we do define the entry or exit criteria, but maybe the way things changed while working, and we might have to re-evaluate whether the test item meets the entry or exit criteria as well. We might have done that before, but depending on the changes which occurred during rework, we might have to re-evaluate that as well. Okay, so now again, this is the first learning objective for test monitoring and control, which is metrics used in testing. So metrics can be collected during and at the end of test activities in order to assess. That's why I have highlighted both during and end, because collecting metrics is a continual process. It's not that we have to wait for the end and only then we collect the metrics. So metrics, like if there are 5 days of testing, then we will collect metrics like each day, and then maybe if any corrective action needs to be taken, it can be taken on second day rather than just waiting for 5 days and then coming up with a corrective action for the 6th day. So it can be collected during and at the end of test activities in order to assess. So what are we assessing? Progress against the planned schedule and budget. So whatever the schedule we planned in the beginning, and also the budget as well, it has to be evaluated, assessed against that, because as soon as there is any deviation from the plan detected, then then there needs to be any action against that, like what are we going to do in order to keep it on track. And the second one is current quality of the test object. Okay, so every test object will have a certain quality, and of course it can't be measured until you start any test activity. So how you will assess the metrics will also be based on the current quality of the test object. So we will go through the test metrics as well. What will be the test metrics which usually we include shortly, so then that will be more clear. The third one is adequacy of the test approach. So how adequate is the approach which you defined for testing? And the last one is effectiveness of the test activities with respect to the objectives. Okay, so the test activities which we are performing for a certain project, how effective they are in order to meet the test objectives defined for that project. So so the metrics which we collect uh, during or end of the test activities, these are basically collected in order to assess these things. Okay, so now let's go through that what test metrics can include. So test metrics can include, of course, it can be much more than these as well, but these are the common ones. So first of all, percentage of planned work done in test case preparation or percentage of planned test cases implemented. So this can be our one metric which will identify that how much work is done, like how much test cases we have prepared, and maybe we can compare it with the requirements in order to get the traceability. So this will give us a good measure of if there are any gaps or not. The second one is percentage of planned work done in test environment preparation. Okay, so whenever we have to set up and design a new test environment. So of course there was some planning was done, some estimation was done in order to come up with the test environment preparation. So of course when then the actual time taken for that can be one of the test metrics as well. Then the third one, test case execution. So of course, if when we are executing the test, so that's an important metric to be captured, that how many tests we plan to execute versus how many we have actually executed. Were there any blockers? Which like for example number of test cases which were executed, which were not executed, maybe there were some blockers, or maybe there was some other reason due to which we were not able to execute those test cases. And then the ones which we executed, how many are passed, how many are failed, and if there are any test conditions which passed, failed, etc., all the details. So this all comes in test case execution, and it's a very important metric to capture. The next one is defect information. For example, defect density, defects found and fixed, failure rate, and confirmation test results. So in this one, if you're not aware of what is defect density, so this is one of the quite important metric which is gathered in terms of the defects, and this is basically the number of defects which is detected maybe in a component or in a system during a defined period of time, and then we divide it by the size of that system or a component, and then we get the defect density. So this is quite important as well, all the defect information. Then the next one is test coverage of requirements, user stories, acceptance criteria, risks, or code. Okay, so we will keep all these metrics captured as well, because that will help us a lot. Like it's not like only that we capture the test execution and the defect rate as well, but on top of that we also need to improve the quality of the entire process, which also will include that how much what was the coverage, the test coverage of requirements, and uh, the designs of test cases, that they included are they covering the acceptance criteria? Are they covering all the risks which were key risks which are involved in that project? So that would be a key metric as well. Then the next one is task completion, resource allocation and usage, and effort. When we are doing the planning of any project, then we are also allocating few resources. So if we have assigned, let's say, 10 testers for a project, but we are only using 5 of them, then of course we are just wasting those resources. And on the other hand, if we have earlier we identified 10 resources, but then while we are collecting the metrics for that, we see that, okay, 10 people are not able to execute the tests or perform testing activities because the project is more complex than we anticipated in the beginning, and maybe we require now 15 resources. So this means that in the next time, maybe next phase or next similar project, then we will have that metric in mind, and we can learn from that, for this kind of project, 10 resources are not sufficient, and maybe we should allocate 15 resources next time. So this is also an important metric. The next one is cost of testing, including the cost compared to the benefit of finding the next defect, or the cost compared to the benefit of running the next test. Okay, so whenever we are executing tests, the entire testing activities, of course, there are some costs related to that as well. It is an expensive activity. So that's why it's always important to evaluate that whether, and this can be done by this metrics, by capturing the cost of testing, that let's say that one resource is spending, let's say, 1 day, then what's the cost of that? If we are using any specific tool, etc., all these things, they contribute to the cost of testing. So we need to collect this data in order to see that whatever the cost of testing was for that project, was this justifiable, or maybe we just spent a lot of time to test something which might not be that important, and it's not justifying the cost of testing. So let's say that if we have 30 test cases, but the desired result or the quality what we need, and for meeting the testing objectives, if it's done in 20 test cases, then we don't need to run the next 10, which means that, because that will be just increasing the cost of testing. So this metric, it does help us to decide that whether how many resources or how much time we need to allocate next time for this kind of project or activity. Okay, so the next one is purposes, contents, and audiences for test reports. Okay, so during test monitoring and test control, the test manager regularly issues test progress reports for stakeholders. So we did cover this in the task of a test manager, that the test manager basically issues test progress reports for stakeholders. So in addition to content common to test progress reports and test summary reports, typical test progress reports may also include the status of the test activities and the progress against the test plan, factors impeding progress, so factors which are affecting or slowing down the progress of the project, testing planned for the next reporting period, and also the quality of the test object. So next one is typical test summary reports. So when we are talking about the summary report, then these are the usual contents of that summary report. So first of all, the summary of testing performed, that what testing we performed for that project. So they would be like a summary of that. Then the next one would be information on what occurred during a testing period. So whatever the testing period was, whatever the information we gathered in that testing period, we need to mention that in the summary test report. So as the name says, this is a test summary report, and this would be different to the test progress report, because test progress report is mostly which we do at the we provide based on the metrics collected during a test activity, while the test summary report is at the end. Then deviations from plan, including deviations in schedule, duration, or effort of test activities. Then status of testing and product quality with respect to the exit criteria or definition of done. Factors that have blocked or continue to block progress. So all the factors due to which the testing was blocked for a certain time, then that needs to be listed, mentioned in the test summary report, because that will make it clear that why, if the testing took longer, then okay, it might be because of this. And it will also help us to review that what and come up with some corrective actions for maybe the next phase for the next project. Okay, so metrics of defects, test cases, test coverage, activity progress, and resource consumption, as already described in 5.3.1, which is this, this one. So we already covered this part in that section. Then there is residual risks. So this is which we will cover in the coming section, which is 5.5. So I will leave it till then. And the last one is reusable test work products produced. Okay, so if in any project, if there is any test work products are basically the outputs. So if there are any deliverables which were reused in that project, then that would be part of that test summary report as well. Okay, so the contents of a test report will vary depending on the project, the organizational requirements, and the SDLC which we are using for that project. So these are the contents which we discussed over here. They might differ because of these three factors. For example, a complex project with many stakeholders or a regulated project may require more detailed and rigorous reporting than a quick software update. So which is true, if there is a regulated project, then it's very critical. So maybe we require more detail in the report than this, because only then it will provide satisfaction to all the stakeholders and to the business owners, so that they are satisfied that yes, we are confident to go live with this. So it depends on the type of project and what are the requirements, and of course the SDLC as well. So in the next example, in agile development, the test progress reporting may be incorporated into task boards, defect summaries, and burn down charts, which may be discussed during a daily stand-up meeting. Okay, so we said test progress reports. So in a sequential project, we have a template for the test progress reports, which can be sent like every day. But if we are doing an agile, then every team member, if they are using a management tool like Jira, so they have all these things over there, like they discuss it every day because they have a daily stand-up meeting. And this is the purpose of having daily stand-up meeting, to discuss the progress of testing. So they have defect summaries. They can see that on the dashboard, on the task boards, the sprint board, that what is done, what is not done, how far we are. And of course, the burn down chart also shows that are we on track to deliver the deliverables at the end of the sprint. So in agile, of course, it's different to the traditional sequential SDLC. Okay, so we did said that these are the factors which will define that what will be the contents of the test report. But in addition to that, there is one more thing which might vary that the contents of the report is the report's audience. For example, the type and amount of information that should be included for a technical audience or a test team may be different from what would be included in an executive summary report. Because let's say that if we are doing it for a technical audience or test team, so in that case, the detailed information on defect types and the trends, that is very, very important. But in the later case, if we are producing a test report for an executive, for business owners, let's say, then it will be a very high level report with the status of testing, with the summary of defects. We don't need to give the entire list of the defects. In that case, a summary of defects would be sufficient with some schedules, etc. So that should be sufficient. So we did cover this ISO standard in last session as well, with where we said that the test plan outline, an example of that is given. So the same standard 29119-3, it also refers to two types of test reports. So apart from the test plan, it also have the two types of test reports, which are the test progress report and the test completion report, which is also known as test summary report in this syllabus. So I hope that what we covered today is clear, and now we are done with the 5.3, which is test monitoring and control as well. And next week, then we will cover the next section. We are still in the test management module, but we will continue with the next section. Okay, so let's start with some practice questions. And of course, if you have any other question as well, then yeah, feel free to ask that. So the first one is, which of the following is a major task of evaluating exit criteria and reporting? So please go through the options and let me know what do you think is the correct answer. Okay, any answer? Okay, I've got two of them, one from Madhuri, one from Jatin. So Madhuri has said option D and Jatin is saying option A. Okay, let's see. So which of the following is a major task of evaluating exit criteria and reporting? Okay, so Madhuri, you have said A, no, so you have said D. Jatin is saying writing a test summary report for stakeholders, which is the correct option. Let's see that what's the last one, D, evaluating testability of the requirements and system. No, so this one is basically which can be in the beginning, because when we have the requirements, at that time we evaluate that what's the testability of the requirements. I think we also covered it somewhere in the slide. Let me just go through it quickly so that I can show you. So see, it's availability of testable requirements. So this is part of entry criteria. Over here in the question, we were asking about exit criteria. So I think you just confused it with that one. So I hope that this one is clear now. So the correct answer is A, writing a test summary report for stakeholders. Okay, so the second question is, which of the following is most important difference between the metrics-based approach and the expert-based approach to test estimation? So we did two techniques, metric-based and approach. So over here, if you go through all the options, which one is the most important difference? Okay, I've got an answer from Jatin. Okay, Jatin has given me the answer B, which is the correct answer. So let's see what's the B. The metrics-based approach uses calculations from historical data, while the expert-based approach relies on team wisdom. So this is like the spot-on difference between the metric-based and the expert-based. If you go through the other options, then you will get to know that these are clearly not the ones we are looking for. So this is the most important difference. Okay, so the third and last one for the day is, which set of metrics can be used for monitoring of the test execution? Okay, Yavi has given me an answer. Let's see if we can get more and then we can see which one is the right one. Okay, Madhuri has also answered, and so does Jatin. And all of you have given the right answer, which is D. So number of test cases run, not run. Sorry, this is a typo. Test cases passed, failed. Yes, so this is, if you see that all of these are important metrics, but when we are talking about the metrics for test execution, then it talks about the execution of the test. So it's number of test cases run, not run, test cases passed, failed. Okay, so with that, then we have come to an end of today's session. Is there any question for what we covered today? Okay, there's nothing from your side. All right, so if you come across any other question later on, then yeah, please do let me know. You can ask me in the group or you just message me. And thank you so much for attending today's session. And as usual, I will upload the slides for this session and also the recording, and I will also provide the session questions as well. So as we are approaching towards the end of our training, I think there are only two more sessions now left before we move on to the mock exams. So I will strongly advise that the ones who are not attending the sessions or who are actually catching up later on, I will strongly advise that if you can please speed up and complete all the sessions, the questions as well, because it will be quite beneficial if you are joining the mock-up session which we'll be having. All right, then, thank you so much, and I'll speak to you the next week. Till then, take care of yourself. Bye.